Welcome once again to the Just Steward Podcast. I am your host, Doug, and I'm here with my other host, Michael Frigon. How's it going, Michael?
It's going well. How you doing, Doug?
I'm all right. And we're here with David Denton. David, how are you doing?
Doing great. Good to be here.
And we'll get to the intro for David in 1 second. Let me just remind you about what we're about. So the Just Steward Podcast is about preparing the next generation materially, physically, spiritually, and intellectually for everything. And so the leads keep getting added with every episode. We find another way to prepare. And we're about essentially trying to rebuild society, doing our little part to make things better and thinking about the next 25 years. And we're here to talk with our guest, David, about all things education. Specifically, we're going to see where it veers, where we've got some room. We're flexible, David, so I'm sure you're very grateful for that. But David's got a lot of experience in the classical and parochial education space, and we are going to talk about what the future looks like for education. And it probably looks a lot like reaching out to the past. So, David, first, elevator pitch. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Went to prep school, finished prep school with a pretty clear conviction that I did not want to read books anymore. I'd had enough of existentialist literature, and that was enough for this little Baptist boy. That's what books have to offer. I'm out. So I went and got an engineering degree, used that for all of 9 months in cubicle PS2-3-K115 at Dell. That didn't fit either. The real call was to the classroom. I was a high school math teacher, moved from Dell into the classroom, and was a high school math teacher for a decade. Absolutely loved it. The call within the call was into administration. And that took me out to the desert. That's where I met Doug for the first time. It's also where we came into the Catholic Church and was working with a classical charter school state called Great Hearts, and worked with them for 13 years. Ran a school, worked at the home office, was the superintendent for our schools in Arizona for a stretch. Was able to move back home to Texas and open and run the DFW region for several years, and have been consulting in classical and Christian education for the last 3 years with Arcadia Education.
And let me add a few things. David and I's actually paths crossed a few times, because you might not remember this, David, but in the fall, September 1996, I did the history, and I think you and I were at the same football game when I drove from Austin to Virginia to watch Texas get our behinds whooped by Tiki and Rodney Barber in a driving rainstorm. So we did the math and realized we were at that same game.
That was the first game I ever went to as a Wahoo. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. Good memory. Yeah, that was something.
Yeah, and then I guess you were in Austin for 9 months at the same time I was there, but of course our paths didn't cross until 2014 or 2015. So
yeah, who knew?
Yeah, so I know. And I don't know if you said it, but you were an electrical engineering major at UVA, right?
So, yes, I was.
So you can
don't ask me to do anything. It's comical, really, that I was able to even finish that degree. I'm pretty inept when it comes to tech stuff, but I can do the equations.
Okay. Well, you must be doing something right. So, can you tell us a little bit about what it is the company you work for, Arcadia Ed? You were a pretty early hire there. What do they do?
Right. Yeah. So I. Tongue in cheek, explain it this way to folks. Arcadia was founded on the principle that nobody got into classical or Christian education because they're good at operations. There might be a few people who happen to be good at operations, but that's not the reason you went into classical Christian ed. Lot of devotion to the mission, to the vision, a lot of passion for impacting lives of kids. But a lot of times that's not married with operational know-how, and that can take a school sideways. So we love to come alongside schools, particularly if they're having a hard time, but also if they're trying to get from good to great. That's really kind of a real sweet spot for us. Folks who are on the cusp of expanding, or who are just trying to take their operational game to the next level on whatever front.
And I have a pretty good familiarity with a lot of people who work at Arcadia Ed,
Mhm.
and it was born in Arizona. And I tell people that being being in the charter school movement in Arizona in the last 10 years, it's kind of like being the hippest person in Brooklyn, because you're at the tip of the spear. And
Yeah.
so it's no coincidence that a consulting company like Arcadia Ed would have been born out of Arizona, being that, Arizona does get a lot of things right, a fair amount of things wrong. One of the things they got right is school choice. They're early on that. And my theory is it's going to be pretty hard to take that away. Uh, Certainly, people on the left side of the aisle are trying, but it sounds like school choice is one of those things that is it's going to be hard to take away from people once it's out there.
I think that's right. The parent lobby is pretty strong, especially once the charter schools or the schools of choice are established. Um, and it's been fun to watch that movement grow and develop. It's been a few years since I checked, but years ago the stats were that already a quarter of the students in Arizona were in charter schools, and I know that's only grown.
One of the things that I've heard, that where Arcadia adds value add, is that schools start out, they're very mission driven. You've got the founders, everyone's on the same page, and then suddenly you've got to grow. And then scaling the standards, scaling the values doesn't always happen. I mean, Great Hearts founded on the ideas of truth, beauty, and goodness. Every once in a while, we could come across a teacher. Generally, they don't last too long. But they're like, did they not get the memo?
Right.
What this is about. So I mean, so
Yeah.
how describe that pain point for these schools and
Yeah,
what you.
it's such a good point. Yeah, the apocryphal Drucker quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we definitely lived it, that scaling is difficult. You hit inflection points and you have to release control. Other people have to come into full possession of the vision and the culture as well. Otherwise, it ceases to be a culture. And it's difficult to be a large company. Great Hearts had thousands of people. Did a really good job in general. Did a really good job of bringing folks in and helping them uh, lay claim to the vision for themselves. Um, but it's very difficult. Even just growing from a school of 100 kids to 200 kids, it can feel like the vision disappeared, or that the culture has changed irreparably as a result of it. So yeah, it's uh, one of the things that we work with. We're Lencioni disciples in the Arcadia Ed world.
That's Patrick
Um,
Lencioni, the consulting guru, to use a black.
Guru,
Yeah,
yeah,
he is Catholic.
and he's Catholic. Oh, he's a daily master,
Yeah,
so I'm told. And he just a brilliant concept that he has among many is the six critical questions for creating organizational clarity. And question number one is, why do you exist? Why does your institution exist? All right? What is it that you're on earth to bring about? All right? And the answer to that question is really important. If you don't answer it for the organization, then that puts everybody in the position of answering it for themselves. And so you end up with as many employees as you have, each walking around with their own personal reason for why the company exists, and that will take things into a lot of different directions, and you're no longer a unified whole. You're not rowing all in the same direction. So when we're working with folks and you're trying to expand and grow and maintain culture, or even strengthen culture as you expand, the number one thing, the first thing, is that you have to have a clear answer for why do we exist. And everyone in the organization doesn't. They need to not just memorize it. They need to have it. They need to learn it by heart. Right? It needs to be written on their heart, so that it impacts them and impacts their decisions as they go about their day.
all right, very good stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Sorry, uh, it, yeah, I love this stuff. So yeah, as long as you want to hang out here, I'm.
Well, when companies, as I understand, business has been good. So schools see they're in need. You've got kind of three buckets of schools that I'm imagining that Arcadia Ed serves. You've got non-sectarian charter schools. You've got non-Catholic parochial schools, and you've got Catholic parochial schools. Is there another? They generally fall into those three categories.
Yeah, I think that's the Protestant schools would not think of themselves. The parochial word would sound foreign to them. So there's further subdivisions. You can have private church schools, so schools that are not just co-located, but there's sort of shared governance with the church, versus those which are standalone in the Protestant world, and then in the Catholic world there are diocesan schools and there are non-diocesan schools. So those would be the major distinctions. And there's different affiliations and organizations that folks have, but in general, yes, private Catholic, private non-Catholic, and then secular classical. Those would be the three major categories of schools we work with. We also have really had a lot of interest and done a lot of work with entities that are not schools, but that serve the schools we serve. So we've been really blessed and really honored to be invited in to work alongside several of the other institutions that are serving this same mission field.
When you're going out and you're chasing down new business, that might not be your role, but do you have a difficult time telling, is there a challenge conveying that these schools have a need for your services, or do they know they're in trouble? They need, in some cases they are in trouble. I know enough about to know that, but are you, is there a tough sell when you're trying to say, look, you guys need to get better, or they're like, no, we got it covered, and then they realize 6 months later, oh no, we don't have it covered.
Right. Yes, this is an interesting one. You want to be respectful of folks who are out there just giving everything they've got to run a school, and running a school is particularly getting them off the ground into a place of stability it's a lot of work. So I always want to be very respectful of that. It is the case that there are schools who are struggling the most and need you the most, and they'll know it. But generally, as a function of the fact that they are struggling the most, they can't afford services, or they can afford services the least. And on the other end of the spectrum, there can be a sense in which those schools that are furthest along can be blinder to the needs that they have. There's more of a sense of, we've arrived, we've gotten, we don't need additional help, things along those lines. But they're, in the middle, at that cusp of good to great, there's a lot of schools who are they're really strong, and they realize that they're coming up on a decision that they may only make once in the life of their institution, and there's been a lot of fruitful partnerships at schools who are in that moment in their narrative arc.
Can you give an example of that kind of moment? You don't have to give like a specific,
Sure.
school, but just to give some sort of, more detail in terms of like what exactly it is you're helping them with, like
Sure.
that could help.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So if you've been renting your space from a church to operate your school in, and you're now contemplating building your own building, but you're not exactly sure where, or you're not exactly sure how to structure the finances on it, that's a classic place where folks will come to us. It may not be the only time you do it if you exist for 100 years, but it's probably the only time you're going to do it within a generation. We worked with a school that has been around for a couple of generations, and their mission was to serve low-income students, and they'd been around long enough that the area they were in had gentrified, and their student body had turned over significantly. It was a very different demographic of kids that they were serving, and they started to wonder, that actually forced them to go back to why do we exist? Like all the way back to that first question, and reconsider. Do we need to move schools to chase our original demographic, or should we stay here and just continue to serve the kids in our community? They ended up opting for the latter in that particular case, but that's part of strategic business planning. Another one that we're seeing a lot, and this is happening a lot in the private Protestant school world right now, is schools that have done really well, replicating or creating a network that they lead themselves. And it's this really exciting development, but it generates a lot of questions. This is also another area where you don't make that decision more than once, right? Where you go from a single site to running a network. So we're in conversation with and supporting several clients who are in different phases of undertaking that. One last one I'll mention is that this classical school thing is not going away. People are realizing that it's not a fad or a flash in the pan. And increasingly, there are schools who are coming to us asking for help in figuring out how do we become a classical school? How do we transition our academic model to do that? Some of them want to do it covertly. Some of them are happy to do it overtly. Some folks need help with curriculum. Some folks need help with the transition plan. But that's a big one as well, where it's, changing your academic model is not something a school should do every 3 years, right? It's more of a buy and hold, but it's the classical school model has been very compelling in its successes.
So operationally, how do you see the future of classical schools or classical education unfolding? I mean, we talked to Jeremy Beer recently, who gave some good insight into classical education and how he worked in mathematics into that.
Correction, that was Jake.
That was not Jeremy Beer. I'm sorry, that was Jake Tawney. Sorry, Jake Tawney was talking about mathematics in terms of classical education. Giving it more of a well-rounded. Like the fact that most people don't even associate mathematics with classical education. It's always, the classics of Homer and, that such. So in terms of just operations, how do you see the future of classical education unfolding? Like what is the ideal end state? What is the likely end state? Does it really matter? How much does it, I'll let you take it from there. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and it's a question that's on the mind of a lot of the folks in the schools and folks at the who are trying to be leaders in the movement. Belmont Abbey just had a conference a couple of weeks ago. The theme or the name of the conference was Sharing Salt. The idea was that it was an acknowledgement that as the classical school movement has grown, just in the Catholic world, that there's a diversification of models and approaches. They don't all look the same. And so it was an opportunity to get together and let's compare notes. Let's, maybe we duke it out a little bit, figure out where we agree and where we disagree about what classical education even is. So it's worth noting that that's not a settled thing to just say classical ed. We're actually in a period of rediscovery. The keynote at Belmont Abbey was given by Andrew Ellison, who's a good friend. He's the head of enrollment at University of Dallas, and he gave a great
follow on LinkedIn. Also,
he's what?
He's an interesting follow on LinkedIn.
Oh, yeah, no, very active. I think he found his medium finally.
Yes.
Andrew's very, very smart and a great wit and a huge asset to classical ed generally. He introduced me to this years ago. It's an anecdote from Richard Feynman, the physicist, but he wrote about cargo cults. I don't know if that's one that's in your lexicon.
It's a good book. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman.
I think it's in that. Yeah, that's right. And the cargo cults were just following World War II. There were islanders where the Allied soldiers had come and they laid out their airstrips, they set up their temporary base. Ships, planes would come in, deliver food, and then leave. And then when the war was over, they packed up and they left. But the islanders had been getting some food from them, but not understanding anything about the mechanized world. There were for years after, you would see, there were islanders who would get coconuts and just pure Gilligan's Island style and replicate what they had seen the air traffic controllers and the ground crew doing to try to call the god from the sky that brought food. And there's Andrew's point was he was conveying that story and saying that the folks who are running classical schools in some sense are we're in that phase right now where we're so much has been lost and jettisoned from the last 3,000 years of rich classical education history that we're just trying to we're imitating what we know was done, but we're still discovering. If you're foreign to classical ed, that could sound like a pretty damning state of things. But the reality is that even as we are still trying to piece things back together and figure out what is the form or forms of classical ed that are best for us, that it's a good posture of humility. That no, we're not there yet. There's a lot to still learn and figure out, but even where we are, we're already in general. The results are head and shoulders above the rest of the world.
Can you talk about some misconceptions that you deal with? This would be an extended question, but we touched on the math. And look, the schools are doing math. Like as someone who's got a son who's doing calculus as a junior, they're doing fine on math. And so there's not iPads in the classroom. But what kind of straw man and ignorance do you find as you're trying to evangelize this classical tradition? I know someone who's very close to both you and I heard a story or a series of stories that basically involve a lot of misconceptions about the classical Western tradition, talking to parents about them, and literally the parents think they're talking about the Old West.
Right. The Wild
As an amateur Old West historian, I'm glad for the plug, but they literally think they're talking about cowboys and things like that.
Right. Classical music or cowboys and Indians, or if you were to, in some places, it's referred to as classical liberal education. Oh, good, the left side of the aisle. This is somewhat progressive. There's those sort of entry level, just completely misunderstood the terms challenges. I think most people have a sense that it's just something that they don't know what it is. That those thoughts might go off, but they know it's probably not what it is, but I don't really know what it is. So just ignorance generally, I think is still the norm. But then there's also notions of you're fetishizing the past, right? This is just sort of you're looking backwards when we should be looking forwards. So there can be a concern that y'all are chasing something in an idealistic way, and that's all well and good. I'm all for idealism, but it's the American soul is really grounded in, really attached to, and hugs the guardrail of, but is it practical? Is this gonna work in the real world? And I think that if anything, that's where the anxiety is. A lot of I think we see that parents are really eager, super happy to have a classical elementary school. Still generally pretty happy to have a classical middle school. By the time when they get to high school, though, that's when things are starting to get real, and there can be I need to stick with what I know as a parent.
Where's the iPad?
I trusted the education I got. That got me into college, got me along. So I want to replicate that for my kid. It was a good starting point. You kept him safe. You protected him, bubble wrapped him from the world for a little bit. But now it's time to get real. Get the iPad, get the screen, learn how to program a computer, or whatever else. Be on the robotics team, and charge ahead that way. That's one set. That's one set of concerns. There's another set of concerns to greater or lesser degrees at different classical schools. Some culturally will dial the clock back a little bit more as well. So there may be no cheerleaders, or there may be the ways in which dances are operated or run are different. And so you will see other families who are thinking that, hey, this is they're not on board with the level of really purity that's being oriented towards. They want something that's more of a normal, if you will, American experience. And largely what that really means is their kids complaining a lot that they're not having fun, and mom and dad don't really have either the confidence or the argument at the ready as to why their kids should do something different, and they get worn down because kids are really good at their job of wearing their parents down and getting what they want. They're pros at it.
There's a lot I can ask about this, so if you don't mind, Doug, I'll take
Right away.
Go for it. First, thinking about that, what I'll actually start with this question: are there some institutions, or is it possible for some schools to have a classical curriculum within their general school? Because I growing up, I went through a public, both Catholic private school and then public high school, and they have the AP courses, advanced placement courses, and they have the general classes. Is it possible to have a classical track? And I know it's probably it'd take a lot of political will to say it's worth investing in that for a public school, but maybe a charter school can be is that possible? Has anyone done it?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's an active question in different pockets throughout the country where folks are trying to figure out exactly how to do that. A few, very limited in the public school system, but there are some. In Florida, there are ISDs, so independent school districts, where they're looking to have a school that is classical among other schools, which is not a school within a school, but they're looking at bringing a classical option into their portfolio, if you want to think of it in those terms. So yeah, it's an active question that folks are trying to figure out. It will start happening. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see that crop up in different forms. The challenge is it comes down to one thing that is, I think, core to defining what classical is if we need a distinction between ends and means. The ends of classical education are that's the place where classical schools are much more aligned, is in their ends. And there's basically we could think of it as two. One is the formation of the human person, to be virtuous and to be oriented towards the pursuit of truth, goodness, and beauty. And the other is the transmission of culture. And those are kind of two sides of the same coin. You really can't do one without the other. But when we talk about the transmission of culture, as citizens of America, we're citizens of the West. Our country is formed by Western thought. That goes back to not just to Europe, but to Jerusalem, Rome, and Athens as sort of the founts of where the tradition, the intellectual tradition of the West originated from. And so in particular, when we talk about transmitting culture, it's in particular in the context of school, giving kids their intellectual inheritance as citizens of the West. If you want to understand the world today, you need to understand what happened before you in the story. You don't want to just open to the middle of the book and start reading. You want to give kids a chance to read from the beginning so they understand the narrative arc that they're a part of. And these two ends go together. As we transmit culture, part of the culture of the West is a conception of virtue, a conception of what it means to live the good life. Even the disposition to ask the question is a very Western approach. It's also a very Western approach to ask, to look outside of yourself, right? So the West has always been intentional about looking outside of the West, right, to understand the rest of the world as well. So all of the, there's a lot of deep tissue mindsets that we don't even realize are not our own. We have them, but we don't even realize that it's something that's come to us by virtue of where we were born and when. So making all that explicit for kids has always been a part of, or exploring it has always been a part of classical education.
So what would you say to the claim that classical education is too rigorous for the broader general public? I haven't studied the history of education specifically, but
Right.
My reading, it seems like classical education was pretty much reserved for the elites from a lot of history, and the people that could afford to go to these schools and learn Latin and Greek and do those. That was the entrance into high society and academia, and even like all sorts of the upper class kind of area.
That's what I'm hoping.
But it's a fair question, because like as education expanded and to include more of the population, to eventually include all of the population, that's when it seemed like you saw kind of the more progressive education that led to lowering of standards, that now we've gotten the worst, where we're going down to the lowest common denominator and just only trying to teach the minimum that people need, and some kids aren't learning very much. So how do you balance that in the classical world? Do you think that classical education should be only for certain people who have the desire and maybe even the ability to do it? Or is that something that everyone can do?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Just personally, I very much subscribe to the Mortimer Adler principle that the best education for the best is the best education for all. He has a beautiful analogy of if classical education is the rich cream as opposed to skim milk, right? If it's the good stuff with all the nutrients in it, people are going to come with different size cups, right? Some folks might have a really big cup. Some folks might have a very small cup in terms of what they're able to actually consume. But nobody should, whatever cup they're bringing to the table, nobody should get skim milk. Everybody should get the rich cream. So that's the Adlerian principle. It's certainly one that I've subscribed to, and one that I've benefited from. I have 6 kids. Private school is not an option, and so my kids have all grown up through a classical in a classical charter school environment, and we've been profoundly grateful for that. The democratizing of what would have been an elite education just 3 generations or even 2 generations ago. And yeah, so is it inherently elitist? I would say no. It's the culture or the mindset around it. The folks who were able to partake of it would certainly give rise to that idea, that perception. That makes sense. But here we have, particularly with with school choice, it's made it, it's making it available, and there's several networks that have moved in and brought secular public options for classical education to folks throughout the country, largely in civic centers as opposed to in rural areas. But I think this is I think it's a great thing, and it's the for me when I was running a school, you run tours, parents come and they ask you the same question or some version of it. Just on the rigor side, like I kind of worried that my kid's not going to be able to make it. Like, you guys sound really serious about what you're doing, and it kind of intimidates us. Like, I totally get it. What I would always say, and what is true, is that the number one determining factor for success, really at anything, but also at including a classical education that's rigorous, is a willingness to work. It's not native intelligence. That's an interesting American mindset that we have. This sort of fascination with geniuses. That's not universal to man. There's a lot of other cultures that they don't fetishize being a genius. They really venerate working hard and working your tail off, and so it's. Kids come with all different giftings, and that's great. But if the core principle is to develop them as human beings, to develop them in virtue, then it's not to maximize their intellectual capacity per se. That's going to happen, but it's going to happen because we focus on the virtue of discipline and perseverance. All right, having grit. In getting the work done. So that's that willingness to work, I think, is a big one. And Americans have been rediscovering this. And it's not like it's ever completely disappeared, but the book Grit that came out 10, 15 years ago was a big catalyst, I think. A really positive contribution to the conversation along those lines. So I don't think people should be run off by the rigor. And one other thing to say, rigor for rigor's sake is no good. We're here to form kids, and it's not. Schools have to define what kind of school that they're going to be. Some schools really do need to be the MIT, right? But not every school needs to be the MIT of whatever they're doing. So. In general, classical schools have set the bar very high, set high expectations for kids, and helped kids realize that they can overcome their fears and they can get over that high bar. And that's near universally the experience and the strategy that the classical schools are employing, and rightly so, to form kids. Setting a low bar that everybody can get over is not going to form virtue, so that's not really worth having. But you also tend to not see hyper specialization in classical schools, where you find the kids who they just got the math gene, and you push them all the way through higher level undergraduate work, while they're still sophomores, things like that.
Yeah. All right. Two questions, two short questions to close this out. First one's for me. Last one is our typical closeout question for Michael. What do you think that public schools will learn or reform, or are they going to keep, broadly speaking, doubling down into the indoctrination?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Is that the question?
That's the question.
Okay. So this is interesting. We've had conversations in a couple of different states, 3 or 4 now, where public school leaders at the district level are trying to figure out. They're responding to the pressure and trying to figure out how can we move in this direction in 1 or 2 places. Get one school that's going in this direction. Get a track. To Michael's point, have a track within a school that's going in this direction. And usually it's a combination of they hit the jackpot with the local school board, where there's sufficient alignment there that there's openness to consider the question, so they see an opportunity to move in that direction. But there's a lot of planning that goes into it. You can't just run in and slap something together that's going to last and be meaningful. So there's any number of roadblocks that they run into. But the fact that people are trying to figure it out and trying to move in that direction shows us that there is responsiveness to market forces, even in the public school system. It's really slow. And it's not that it's, and that said, I don't see the tide turning. We see isolated cases. There's a trend of isolated cases, but I don't see this being a dominant force or movement in the public school system.
All right.
At least not on the 5 to 10 year timeline.
Gotcha. All right, Michael, to you.
Yeah, so we'd like to ask all of our guests to kind of speak to, in their own words, what stewardship means to them. So what does it mean to be a steward? How do you be a good steward? And you can take that question and answer it however you wish.
That's a great question. So, just in the sense of you're given the gifts and resources that you're given, and you mean the parable of the talents, looking to make wise investments with the resources that you've been given. For me, that I don't know that I'm going to have deeper wisdom, certainly not than the scriptures along those lines. But thinking as a parent and as somebody who's really has felt called in his professional career to working in education and ed reform, broadly speaking. There's also the calling that you're given that's a gift as well, and something to steward. So that's, I think, as I've thought about that question for myself, it's I've framed it within what's God calling me to in my professional work, and am I doing everything I can to make myself a tool that is capable of achieving an outcome that makes a greater impact in the world. And that's it's led me to have to deny myself several times. So I loved being a teacher. That was my favorite thing of all. But I saw within myself sufficient capacity to go and be a leader. So I said yes to that and did that. The deep desire of my heart is to see as many kids as possible be able to encounter the classic works of Western civilization, particularly in the context of seminar. That's what changed my life. That's a major part of why I converted to Catholicism. And so I know the transformative power of reading and encountering the great minds. This feels like a calling for me. And that's a calling that I want to shepherd and steward. And even if I'm not a poet. I'm not a classicist by training. But what I see is that I have the capacity to be somebody who helps build the rails on which that train rolls. And so I want to be really good at building those rails.
Well, I hope that your mission is successful.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that.
As many young minds as possible in this way.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, amen.
All right. Well, David, thanks for your time. I'm waiting until you move back to Arizona, but I guess
appreciate that.
Dallas.
Fun day.
So, and then, but I understand Texas needs you too. Actually, I don't know if Texas does need you.
Right?
They're doing pretty well. Arizona is, getting a little dicey in some areas. So, but anyway, love to have you back, both in real life and on the show. And also, we can find out more about Arcadia Education at arcadiaed.com. And David's on LinkedIn. He's not as prolific a follow as Andrew Ellison, but he's there.
You are.
Yeah.
You are.
And also, you can find out more about us, taylorfrigon.com, if you want more information about our services. Anything else you need to add or say or plug before we leave, David?
I think that's it. If you want help with your operations at your school, don't hesitate to reach out and give us a call.
All right.
Thanks, guys. It's a ton of fun.
No, thanks for talking to us. And thanks to Michael, my co-host, my colleague, and thanks for our guest, David Denton. And remember, join us next time on the Just Steward podcast. Remember to just steward.